While many are familiar with names such as Asbury, Coke, Watcote, and Garretson as being instrumental in the founding and spread of Methodism in America, very few know of Harry Hosier. Yet, Harry Hosier played an important role in the beginnings of Methodism. So who is Harry Hosier? It is believed that Harry Hosier was born near Fayetteville, North Carolina around 1750. Since he was born a slave to slave parents, it is hard to be sure if this is really where or when he was born. Some historians propose that Hosier was a slave of Henry, also known as Harry, Dorsey Goff, who lived at a large plantation called Perry Hall, about 12 miles northeast of Baltimore. Whether Hosier was born there or was sold to Goff, we do not know, but having Harry Hosier living at Perry Hall provides the opportunity for Francis Asbury to meet Hosier. The Goffs built a chapel on their plantation, so the circuit preacher came there twice a month, and Asbury was one of those visitors. W. P. Harrison, in The Gospel Among the Slaves, describes Harry Hosier this way. Harry was small in stature, coal-black, and with eyes of remarkable brilliance and intelligence. He had a quick mind, a most retentive memory, and such eloquent flow of words, which he could soon put into almost faultless English, that he was pronounced by many the greatest orator in America. As mentioned before, Francis Asbury could have met Hosier at Perry Hall, but we have no record of that. Asbury first mentions Hosier in his journal on Thursday, June 28, 1780, when he was in North Carolina. From his entry, it seems that Asbury had met Hosier previously. Asbury writes, "I have thought that if I had 2 horses and Harry, a colored man, to go with, and drive one and meet the black people, and to spend about 6 months in Virginia and the Carolinas, it would be attended with a blessing." His next mention of Hosier is almost a year later in Virginia. On Sunday, May 13th, Asbury writes, "Preached at the chapel. Afterward, Harry, a black man, spoke on the barren fig tree. This circumstance was new, and the white people looked on with attention." Later in that same month, Asbury notes that Hosier spoke to the African Americans, some who had traveled a great distance to hear him. Not everyone was pleased with what he had to say, because he preached that one could fall from grace. It seems that Hosier made a name for himself amongst the African American population and had begun to catch the attention of whites. Asbury's next mention of Hosier in his journal occurs on October 27, 1781. At this time, they are in Delaware, and Asbury feels drawn to go to Virginia. Asbury states, "Harry seems to be unwilling to go with me. I fear his speaking so much to white people in the city has been or will be injurious. He has been flattered and may be ruined." Hosier worked with other preachers besides Asbury. Thomas Coke, John Wesley's emissary to America, who became the first bishop of the Methodist Episcopal Church, writes in his journal that he first met Asbury on Sunday, November 14, 1784, and notes, "He has given me his black, Harry by name, and borrowed an excellent horse for me." 2 weeks later, on Monday, November 29, 1784, Coke speaks extensively of Hosier. "I have now had the pleasure of hearing Harry preach several times. I sometimes give notice immediately after preaching that in a little time Harry will preach to the blacks, but the whites always stay to hear him. Sometimes I publish him to preach at candlelight, as the Negroes can better attend at that time. I really believe he is one of the best preachers in the world. There is such an amazing power attends his preaching, though he cannot read, and he is one of the humblest creatures I ever saw." In fact, Harry Hosier was present as Thomas Coke ordained Francis Asbury at the Christmas Conference in Baltimore in 1784, the birth of the Methodist Episcopal Church in America. Hosier traveled with Richard Watcote from 1786 to 1788. In 1787, Watcote, the presiding elder in Delaware, eastern Maryland, and eastern Pennsylvania, reported an increase of 847 African American members in those 3 areas. Perhaps this increase was due to Hosier's preaching. From 1789 to 1790, Hosier traveled with freeborn Garretson, presiding elder for New York. Their travels ranged from New York into New England. Nathan Bangs, the biographer of Garretson, highlights some of Hosier's contributions. Preaching to more than 1,000 people in a meeting house in Providence, preaching after Garretson in Canaan, Connecticut to about 500 people in the open air, garnering much applause, causing weeping with his exhortation in Salisbury, being sent ahead to supply Garretson's afternoon appointment, preaching instead of Garretson because of the crowd's curiosity about him, and being heard with admiration by different denominations. Reverend Henry Beam, who traveled with Asbury, shared his reminiscences of Hosier. Some inquire whether he was really black, or whether Anglo-Saxon blood was not mixed in his veins. Harry was very black, an African of Africans. He was so illiterate he could not read a word. He would repeat the hymn as if reading it and quote his text with great accuracy. His voice was musical, and his tongue as the pen of a ready writer. He was unboundedly popular, and many would rather hear him than the bishops. Beam notes that Garretson praised Hosier's ability to move a congregation, claiming, "I have never seen so tender a meeting in this town before, for a general weeping ran through the congregation, especially when Harry gave an exhortation." Beam also quotes Coke as saying, "I am well pleased with Harry's preaching." Unfortunately, he also shares that Hosier fell under the influence of alcohol. "'Tis painful to mar a picture so beautiful. Gladly I will leave it as it is. But alas, poor Harry was so petted and made so much of, that he became lifted up. Falling under the influence of strong drink, he made shipwreck of the faith, and for years he remained in this condition. He was afterward reclaimed and died in peace in Philadelphia in 1810, and was buried in Kensington." Hosier's legacy is large. His sermon on the barren fig tree, which Asbury noted in his journal, was the first sermon preached by an African American in America. Similarly, he was the first African American to preach to a white congregation. These accomplishments transcended the prevailing racial norms of that day. Hosier's name lives on at two United Methodist churches: Harry Hosier United Methodist Church in Fayetteville, North Carolina, Hosier's supposed birthplace, and Hosier Memorial United Methodist Church in Atlanta, Georgia. Asbury Theological Seminary is the home of the Harry Hosier Institute, which displays African American exhibits. It is even suggested that Hosier is the basis of the Hosier nickname used in Indiana. It is believed that those who attended the gatherings where Hosier spoke were called Hosiers. As Harry Hosier's influence faded with time, the nickname Hosier came to mean any person who lives in Indiana. When you think of the beginnings of Methodism in America, remember the significant contribution of Harry Hosier.